Earlier this week, I happened to catch the trailer for the new Superman movie. Now, it's coming out in July, and I gotta admit, it looks pretty awesome, and I can't wait to see it. But it also got me thinking, it might be pretty fun to go back in time and see the first time that the Man of Steel was ever shown on the silver screen. Now, I'm not talking about Christopher Reeves or even George Reeves. No, we're talking about the original 1948 serial Superman, starring Kirk Alyn, today on Planet Video. Speaking of originals, this is my very first video on this brand new channel. So, if you're here now, go ahead and leave me a comment so we can know who our day one people are as we continue to release content on this channel. Certainly appreciate it, and it really helps out the channel a lot when you do. Now, before TV sets were in everybody's home, it was common to spend a couple of cents on Saturday morning to go catch a matinee at the theater. And for this, you would get usually some cartoons, a couple of newsreels, maybe a couple of movies, and at least one chapter of a serial. Now, these matinees would usually cost anywhere from 2 to 5 cents, depending on where you lived. And I gotta admit, that's pretty wild, because we're gonna spend in a couple of weeks, what, $25 to go see one movie and then go home? Maybe another $15 on popcorn? Man, inflation really friggin' sucks. Now, movie serials were hugely popular with kids during the first half of the 1900s. Serials are action-packed short films that are usually about 15 minutes long and broken down into weekly chapters. These chapters would usually end with a cliffhanger of some sort. Now, Superman debuted in Action Comics #1 10 years earlier in 1938 and was already wildly popular in both comics and radio. They even had an animated series of short films that ran in theaters from 1941 to 1943, but the character had never been seen in a live-action adaptation. Now, this wasn't for lack of trying. In 1940, Republic Serials tried to get the rights to the film, but they weren't able to do so. So the script that would have been the original Superman serial was reworked into a different serial called The Mysterious Dr. Satan. Now, they tried again in 1941, but this time they were also unsuccessful, mainly because National Comics, which is the company we now know as DC, wanted 100% of creative control over the entire production, and this is just something they were not willing to do. And it was a moot point anyway, because the rights to the character had already been given to Paramount to make the cartoons that we talked about earlier. Finally, in 1947, producer Sam Katzman secured the rights to make the live-action adaptation. However, when he brought the project back to Republic, they were no longer interested. But Columbia Pictures did take on the project, and on January 5th, 1948, the 15-chapter serial hit theaters in the United States. So with that, let's check out 1948's Superman. Chapter 1 is mostly about Superman's origin story. On the planet Krypton, Superman's father, Jor-El, is a well-renowned scientist. Now, volcanoes are erupting all over the planet, and Jor-El discovers that the reason for this is because Krypton is being drawn toward its sun and will soon explode. Now, he's built a trial spaceship, and he hopes to build a fleet of ships to carry everyone from Krypton to the planet Earth. Now, the leaders of Krypton hold an emergency session to hear what Jor-El has to say, but they ultimately decide that their top scientist doesn't know what he's talking about, even though the planet is literally crumbling all around them. Jor-El finishes his prototype ship, and he and his wife put his infant son inside, and they send the ship into space right before Krypton explodes. And if all of this sounds familiar, it's because it's your basic Superman origin story. The ship lands on Earth, the Kents find the ship, they take in the child, they raise him as their own. The Kents eventually pass away, and Clark heads to Metropolis to start his new life. Chapter 2 is another pretty low-stakes Superman story. Superman arrives in Metropolis, he stops a train from crashing, he saves a woman from a burning building, he frees some miners from a tunnel that collapsed, and Clark gets a job at the Daily Planet so that he can know when Superman is needed the most. In Chapter 3, Superman spends the first third of the episode stopping random crime left and right, and this gets the attention of the U.S. government. The Secretary of National Security sends for Superman, and when he arrives in Washington, He introduces Superman to Dr. Graham. They then proceed to show Superman Graham's invention, a thing called the reducer ray. And this is a machine that can destroy a target from thousands of miles away. They plan a demonstration to show Superman what the machine can do. And this is where we meet our villain of the series, the Spider Lady. Now, she wants to steal the reducer ray for her own nefarious purposes. So she sends a couple of her henchmen to stop the demonstration, but Superman ends up stopping them. And it'd be amiss if I didn't mention how Superman is shown to fly in this serial. Instead of using wires or something like that to show him take off, they switch to an animated version of the character when he flies. Now, I know a lot of people online have complained about this approach over the years, but honestly, I kind of like it. With all of the CGI that you see in any movie today, it's kind of fun to see a studio attempt a similar premises with the tech that they had available at the time. Anyway, the feds want Superman to guard the reducer ray and keep the Spider Lady from getting her hands on it, an assignment which Superman gladly accepts. Not long after this, a meteor lands near Metropolis, and Lois and Clark go out to investigate. After Lois ditches Clark on the side of the road so that she can steal the story for herself, which is something that she's going to do a lot, and every time she does this, she gets herself in trouble. I swear, this lady does not learn her lesson in this entire movie. But Lois's plan backfires when Professor Leeds meets Clark on the side of the road and takes Clark to see the meteor for himself. Now, of course, it turns out that this meteor is actually kryptonite, and it causes Clark to faint in the professor's office. When he comes to, he asks the professor to destroy the meteor and reveals himself to be Superman. One of the professor's colleagues overhears Superman and the professor talking and tries to sell the information to the Spider Lady, but after he tells her about the kryptonite, she betrays him and instead catches him in her deadly web. Now, I'm not really sure what the Spider Lady's web actually does, because sometimes you get electrocuted, or sometimes you just explode, and I think it only gets used twice, so it's about 50-50. But anyway, the Spider Lady's men decide to steal the kryptonite, and then they immediately use it to defeat Superman and make a getaway. So that's when the Spider Lady lays out her first plan to eliminate Superman once and for all. She hopes to kidnap Clark Kent and use him as bait to trap Superman, but ends up snagging Jimmy Olsen instead. And by the way, the guy that plays Jimmy in this serial is named Tommy Bond, and he bears a more than striking resemblance to comedian Steven Rannazzisi from The League. I can't help but wonder if these guys are related somehow. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments section, because I am really curious about that. When Superman shows up to save Jimmy, one of the henchmen does the stupidest thing ever and throws the kryptonite at Superman during the fight. He misses, and instead the kryptonite goes into the furnace. Now, the smoke chokes up Superman for a minute and allows the bad guys to escape, but now they don't have the kryptonite anymore. The Spider Lady gives up on stealing the reducer ray and instead kidnaps Dr. Graham to build her a duplicate. At first he refuses, but after some persuading, he reveals that he can't do it without a certain chemical called monochromite. So the Spider Lady sends some of her men to a chemical engineer to get some. But he gets suspicious that these might be the very men who kidnapped Dr. Graham in the first place, so he calls the Daily Planet. Not the police, the newspaper. And, I can't tell. Is this just a quirk of the story, or is this really how they did things in the 40s? Anyway, Perry sends Clark to investigate, but Lois goes instead and sets up Clark to get arrested for stealing her car. I'm no lawyer, but this feels like a felony. Anyway, when Lois and Jimmy arrive, they plan on giving the men an empty box with Jimmy inside so that he can see where their hideout is. And I just got one question. And then what, Jimmy? And then what? You get shot before you can even get away? Anyway, their absurdly stupid plan is foiled when Jimmy exits the box too early. The truck hits a bump, and the sound of the empty box falling over makes the bad guys go out to investigate, where they see Jimmy's hands closing up the box from the inside, and they fill the box with bullets. Only it wasn't Jimmy inside, it was Superman, having broken out of jail. Superman ties up the bad guys and then goes back to jail before Clark is discovered missing. With her plan to steal the monochromite having failed, the Spider Lady now plans to steal the ore containing the chemical and process it at her hideout. So her men visit a mining engineer to try to find where the monochromite is mined. But when he refuses to help them, he is shot during a struggle. The men leave before the cops arrive, and Lois shows up to investigate. She finds a map to the mine, but the bad guys show up again before she can escape. While the bad guys are distracted by the map, Lois scratches a clue into the glass of the window showing where the mine is located. Lois tries to make a break for it, but she ends up getting knocked out instead. They decide to roll her up in the carpet and take her with them to the mine. Clark and Jimmy arrive looking for Lois, and when they see the broken window, they can tell a struggle happened. They see the scratch in the window, and they figure out where the mine is. Now they head off to try to save Lois. When Clark and Jimmy arrive at the mine, there's a short fight before the bad guys ultimately get away. They handcuff Clark and Lois together, and they knock out Jimmy. Their final plan is to blow up the mine and trap Clark and Lois inside. The blast does knock out Lois, but of course it doesn't hurt Clark. Instead, he changes into Superman and gets Lois to safety. Now that the Spider Lady has the ore, Dr. Graham refuses to help her anymore. One of her men knows a, quote, scientific way of making him obey her every command. Now, they never actually show what this scientific method of submission is, but nonetheless it works, and the Spider Lady orders the doctor to finish the ray machine, which he reveals that he cannot do without one of the parts from the real machine at the university. So of course her new plan is to steal that part of the original machine, since it would take too long to duplicate. Now Superman shows up to try and stop him, and he does catch a couple of the Spider Lady's men, but ultimately they get away with the part that they need. The Spider Lady completes the machine and uses it to blow up the jail where her men are being held to prevent them from revealing where her hideout is. Man, nobody can trust this lady. That's got to be the most dastardly villain I've ever seen. Spider Lady radios the Daily Planet and lets them know that she has completed her reducer ray, and she's going to use it to blow up the Daily Planet's headquarters to demonstrate the machine's power. However, while her men were in jail, their cell was bugged, and the recording leads Superman straight to her hideout. She turns the ray on Superman, but of course it doesn't even faze him, and during the struggle the Spider Lady gets caught in her own web and is killed. The Spider Lady is defeated, the machine is safe again, and Lois gets one more jab in at Clark for good measure.
You weren't dreaming by any chance that you were Superman?
That's exactly what I was, Lois. And I was flying you through the air.
That wasn't a dream, Mr. Kent. As far as I'm concerned, it was a nightmare.
Now, I really like this serial, so if you're a fan of these old movie serials, or even Superman in general, I highly recommend checking it out. It's really easy to find. It's not only available if you know where to look online, but it's also available on DVD if you prefer physical media. And that's going to do it for this edition of Planet Video. If you like this video and want to see more videos like this, then go ahead and subscribe, because we're going to be posting even more of these in the future. Until next time, I'm Dustin, and thank you for watching.